"Grandma, we need $800,000 by sunrise." That's what my grandson said to me. No, hello, no, how are you? Just those words, hanging in the air like smoke from a house fire. I looked at him standing in my doorway, and I said one word, "Okay." But what I did next, well, that's the part nobody saw coming. When they showed up the next morning expecting a miracle, all they found was a locked door and a single white envelope taped at eye level. What was written inside made them scream so loud the neighbors called to check if someone had died. Stay with me now, because you won't believe how this ends. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, the beginning of the end, or perhaps the end of the beginning. At 74 years old, you learn that most things in life are both at once. It was a Thursday evening, the kind that settles into your bones like an old friend. October had just begun painting the maple trees outside my window in shades of amber and rust, and I was doing what I do best at that hour, absolutely nothing of consequence. My reading glasses were perched on my nose, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside me, and I had just opened the new mystery novel I'd been saving for a rainy day. The house smelled of the lavender candle my daughter had given me for my birthday, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's little terrier yapping at shadows. I had earned this peace. 47 years of marriage to a man who thought vacation meant fishing at the lake 2 miles away. 3 children raised through chickenpox, teenage heartbreak, and one unfortunate incident involving a motorcycle and a garden shed that we still don't discuss at 31 family dinners. A career teaching high school English to students who thought Shakespeare was a waste of time, until I made them see that Romeo and Juliet was really just the original teen drama. I had put in my time, paid my dues, and now, finally, the house was mine alone. Harold passed 6 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, the way he did everything. Sometimes I still find myself setting 2 cups for morning coffee before I remember. But grief, like everything else, becomes a companion you learn to live with. It takes up less space over time, though it never truly leaves. The front door crashed open with such force that I knocked my tea clean off the side table. The cup shattered against the hardwood floor, and for one wild moment, I thought someone was breaking in. My hand flew to my chest, and I'm not ashamed to say I let out a yelp that would have woken the dead. But it wasn't a burglar. It was worse. It was my grandson, Daniel. He stood in the doorway like a man who'd seen a ghost or perhaps become one. His suit jacket was missing, his white shirt untucked and wrinkled, his tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose he hadn't quite escaped. His hair, usually so carefully styled with that pomade the young people use these days, was sticking up in wild directions as though he'd been running his hands through it for hours. And his eyes, Lord, his eyes. I'd seen that look only once before on his father's face, 23 years ago, when he'd crashed the family car into Mr. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes, and had to confess before the insurance claim went through. "Grandma," Daniel said, his voice cracking like a boy going through puberty, though he was 31 years old and supposedly a successful financial consultant. "Grandma, we need," he stopped, swallowed hard, and pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. $800,000 by tomorrow morning. Now, I've lived through a lot in my 74 years. I survived the gas crisis of the 70s, raised teenagers in the 80s, learned to use a computer in my 60s, and figured out how to order groceries on my phone during that pandemic. I've seen things that would curl your hair and straighten it right back out again, but I don't think anything quite prepared me for my own flesh and blood standing in my living room, stepping over broken teacup shards, demanding nearly $1 million like he was asking to borrow the car. "I'm sorry," I said, adjusting my glasses, as though better vision might change what I'd heard. "Did you say 800,000? It's for Miranda," he said, as if her name explained everything. Miranda, his wife of 4 years, the woman who had shown up to our family Thanksgiving last year wearing a fur coat that cost more than my first house. The woman who had once asked me, in all seriousness, why I didn't just have someone do my gardening for me. "She's in trouble, Grandma, real trouble. There are people," he lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder as though the boogeyman might be lurking behind my hydrangeas. "There are people coming tomorrow to collect." I set down my book very carefully, removed my reading glasses, folded my hands in my lap the way I used to do when a student was about to confess to plagiarizing their term paper. "Sit down, Daniel." He didn't sit, he paced, wearing a track in my antique rug like a caged animal. There's no time to sit, Grandma. I've tried everyone. Dad won't return my calls. Mom hung up on me. Uncle Stephen pretended he wasn't home, but I could see him through the window, hiding behind his curtains like a coward. He let out a bitter laugh. You're my last hope. You always said family helps family. You always said. I said a lot of things over the years. I interrupted gently. I also said don't marry someone you've only known for 3 months. But here we are. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Good. Maybe a little truth would shake loose whatever sense was still rattling around in that head of his. How did this happen, Daniel? And I want the real story, not whatever sanitized version you've rehearsed in the car. He stopped pacing. For a long moment, he just stood there, his shoulders rising and falling with each breath. Then, slowly, like a balloon losing air, he deflated onto my grandmother's old settee. Miranda has a problem, he said quietly. A gambling problem. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Not until 3 days ago when she came home crying and told me everything. She's been going to these games. High-stakes poker. Started small, but you know how these things go. He rubbed his face with both hands. She was winning at first, then she wasn't. And the people who run these games, they don't accept payment plans. I absorbed this information the way I absorb most things these days, carefully, turning it over in my mind like a stone you've found on the beach. And where is Miranda now? At home. Locked in the bedroom. She won't come out. And you came to me, your 74-year-old grandmother, for $800,000. You have the house, he said, and the desperation in his voice was so raw it almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. You could take out a loan, or sell it, or what, Daniel? This house has been in our family for 3 generations. Your great-great-grandmother planted those rose bushes out front. Your father took his first steps in this very room, right there by the fireplace. And you want me to mortgage it for your wife's gambling debts. They'll hurt her, he whispered. Grandma, these people don't play around. They'll hurt her, and then they'll hurt me, and Daniel. I said his name firmly, the way I used to say it when he was 7 and throwing a tantrum over bedtime. Look at me, he looked. I'll take care of it. The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. His whole body sagged, tension draining out of him like water from a bathtub. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Grandma. I knew you'd understand. I knew. Go home, I said, standing up and brushing imaginary wrinkles from my cardigan. Go home, take care of your wife, and let me handle this. He was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room to wrap me in one of those desperate hugs that says everything words cannot. I felt the wetness of tears on my shoulder and smelled the coffee and fear on his breath. I love you, Grandma. You're the only one who go home, Daniel. He went. I stood in my living room, alone now except for the broken teacup and the weight of an impossible promise, and I started to think. They say that with age comes wisdom. I'm not sure that's entirely true. I've met plenty of foolish old people, and I've known some remarkably wise young ones, but I will say this. With age comes a certain clarity. When you've lived as long as I have, when you've watched your body betray you piece by piece, when you've buried a husband and attended funerals of friends who seemed immortal just yesterday, you stop caring quite so much about what people think. You stop worrying about following the rules, because you've seen how often the rules fail to protect the people who need protection most. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a plan, the kind of plan Daniel was expecting. Mind you, I wasn't about to march into the bank and sign away my family home for a daughter-in-law who had never bothered to learn my birthday. I wasn't going to drain the retirement account that Harold and I had scraped together over decades of careful saving and sacrifice. And I certainly wasn't going to sit around waiting for whoever they were to show up at my door. No, my plan was different. My plan required courage, creativity, and a one-way ticket to somewhere warm. I moved through the house like a ghost, gathering the things that mattered. Not much, really. A few photographs, my mother's pearl earrings, the love letters Harold had written me during his time in Korea, pressed flat between the pages of our wedding album. I packed light because I've learned that life is lighter when you're not dragging around things you don't need. At 2 a.m, I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, the same table where I'd helped my children with their homework, where Harold and I had sat up late arguing about politics and money and whether to put an addition on the house. The wood was scarred with decades of living, and I ran my fingers over the marks as I thought about what to write. The note came out surprisingly easy, maybe because I'd been thinking about it longer than I realized. Dear Daniel and Miranda, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't worry, haven't done anything dramatic. I've simply decided that at 74, I'm entitled to a vacation. A long one. I know you came here expecting a rescue. You expected me to swoop in with my magic grandmother wand and make everything better, the way I've always done. But here's something I should have told you years ago. Some messes aren't mine to clean up. I love you, Daniel. I've loved you since the moment they put you in my arms, red-faced and screaming, and you grabbed my finger like you'd never let go. I've loved you through every scraped knee, every teenage mistake, every time you swore you knew better than anyone else in the room. I'll love you until my last breath and probably beyond. But love doesn't mean rescue. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. You have each other. Figure at OUTPS, the only thing in my safe is a bag of butterscotch candies and the deed to a timeshare in Florida that isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Sorry. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. I read it over twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into an envelope. I wrote their names on the front in my best handwriting, the cursive I'd perfected in Mrs. Morrison's third-grade class 70 years ago, when penmanship still mattered. By 4 in the morning, I was dressed and ready. My suitcase sat by the door, small and sensible, the same one I'd taken on my honeymoon in 1972. I walked through the house one last time, touching the walls, the doorframes, the spot on the banister worn smooth by generations of hands. I whispered goodbye to the ghosts that lived there. Harold, my parents, all the versions of myself I'd been over the years. Then I taped the envelope to the front door, right at eye level where they couldn't miss it. The drive to the airport was quiet. The roads were empty at that hour, just me and the occasional truck driver hauling goods to somewhere more important. I watched the first light of dawn creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Pure, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. At the airport, I bought a ticket to Tucson. One way. The woman at the counter looked at me strangely. A 74-year-old woman traveling alone with a single suitcase at 5 in the morning isn't exactly typical, but she didn't ask questions. Maybe she could see something in my face. Maybe she understood that as I waited for my flight, I thought about what was happening back home. Daniel and Miranda would be waking up soon, if they'd slept at all. They'd be getting ready to face whatever was coming, probably rehearsing their pleas, their promises, their desperate negotiations, and then they'd drive to my house, full of hope and expectation, only to find nothing. An empty house, a locked door, a single envelope. I imagined Daniel's face as he read my words, the confusion, then the disbelief, then the anger. I imagined Miranda, who I knew would blame me for the rest of her life, as if I were the one who had gambled away a fortune that wasn't mine to lose. And you know what? I was okay with that, because here's the thing about being 74. You don't have time left for other people's foolishness. You've spent your whole life giving, sacrificing, putting yourself last in line, and suddenly you realize that the line is almost at its end and you've never quite reached the front. The plane took off. Just as the sun fully crested the mountains, I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the world shrink beneath me, the houses becoming toys, the roads becoming ribbons, the whole tangled mess of my old life becoming something small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, and I let it go. They found the note, of course. I know because my phone rang 17 times before I finally turned it off. I know because my daughter left a voicemail so long it got cut off. And my son sent a text message that was mostly capital letters and exclamation points. I know because Daniel somehow tracked down the number of the motel where I was staying and left a message with the front desk that simply said, "How could you? How could I? How could I not?" I spent that first week in Arizona doing absolutely nothing. I sat by the pool that hadn't seen a swimmer in years, watching the palm trees sway in the desert breeze. I ate breakfast at a little diner where the waitress called me honey and never asked why I was alone. I drove to the Grand Canyon and stood at the edge, looking down into that impossible chasm of time and stone. And I cried for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I was scared. I won't pretend otherwise. At 74, you don't just uproot your entire life without wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. Every night, I lay in that motel bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a strange place, and questioned everything. What if something happened to Daniel? What if those people hurt him, hurt Miranda. What if my absence made everything worse? But then morning would come, and the sun would paint the desert in colors I'd never seen in Ohio. And I'd remember why I'd done it. Because some lessons can't be taught, they have to be learned. And Daniel would never learn to stand on his own, as long as I was there to catch him every time he fell. 6 months have passed since that October night. I'm still in Arizona, though I've moved from the motel to a little apartment with a cactus garden and a view of the mountains. I've made friends, actual friends, not just people I nod to at church. There's Margaret, who plays bridge like she's plotting a military invasion, and Samuel, a retired professor, who loans me books I actually want to read. There's even a gentleman named George who brings me coffee on Sunday mornings and hasn't yet worked up the courage to ask me to dinner. I'll say yes when he does. Daniel called last month. A real call, not the angry, desperate kind I'd been ignoring. His voice sounded different, older, steadier, like someone who'd been through a fire and come out the other side. We figured it out, he said. Miranda and I. It wasn't easy. We had to sell the house, the cars, most of what we owned. She went to meetings. I went to therapy. We almost didn't make it, Grandma. There were days when I thought we'd drown. But you didn't, I said. Double quotes. No, we didn't. There was a long pause, the kind that holds more meaning than words. I was so angry at you, he admitted. For months, I couldn't even say your name without feeling sick. I thought you'd abandoned me. I thought you didn't love me anymore. Oh, honey. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the Arizona sun on my face. I loved you enough to let you grow up. He laughed, then a real laugh, surprised and genuine. I think I understand that now. It took me a while, but I understand. You still want $800,000? No, Grandma. I could hear the smile in his voice. I'm good. So here we are, at the end of my little story, or perhaps the beginning of a new one, at 74-75 now. As of last Tuesday, I've learned that endings and beginnings are often the same thing, just viewed from different angles. I'm not saying what I did was right for everyone. I'm not saying you should abandon your family at the first sign of trouble or hop on a plane every time life gets hard. But I am saying this: sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to save themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best chapter of your life starts with a locked door and a single envelope. Now I want to hear from you, friends. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have handed over the money, mortgaged your memories, sacrificed your peace for someone else's mistakes? Or would you have done what I did, packed your bags, trusted the people you loved to find their own way, and finally, put yourself first? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this little adventure of mine, don't forget to subscribe, because let me tell you something, life after 70 is just getting interesting. My teacup is full again, and this time, I'm not letting anyone knock it over. The end.